Along with Mayor Keller, we also have a number of city leaders joining us today who can speak to some of the specific questions folks in Albuquerque have been asking. We have Director Carol Pierce with our Family and Community Services Department, Director Dave Simon with our Parks and Recreation Department, Deputy Director Dr. Mark DeMena with our Environmental Health Department, Deputy Director Hakeem Bellamy with our Cultural Services Department, Lieutenant Nick Sanders with the Albuquerque Police Department, and Sasha Pellerin, Senior Advisor for Education at our Family and Community Services Department. Now, I would like to turn the conversation over to Mayor Tim Keller for some initial remarks. Mayor?
Thanks so much, Alan, and hello, Albuquerque. Thank you for joining us today for this telephone town hall. And we are very fortunate today to be able to offer live interpretation for our Spanish-speaking community during this call. It's something we've been working on and hopefully will go smoothly, but we're glad to be able to provide this. And so you will notice a couple of differences today, though we're going to take some pauses as you hear me speak, and that's really just to let the translators catch up. So, of course, it's also Hispanic Heritage Month here in the city of Albuquerque, and so there's lots of activities going on around that and a fitting tie-in to our Spanish Town Hall. So, buenvenidos, everyone, and let's go ahead and get started. Now, as you know, the city is committed to making all of our resources as accessible and as available to folks from different backgrounds. And I did mention, of course, that this town hall is going to be interpreted into Spanish, but I do want to speak a little bit about some of our other dual language programs and remind folks that we actually have made quite a lot of progress on this front. And of course, it's important just for basic city interaction. It's also very much an equity issue, as we do know a large percentage of our city actually does speak another language. And so for us, police and fire can all call for live interpretation. So just so folks know, if they're on the scene and so forth, we have a 24-hour interpretation line, and it's got like a dozen or so different languages. So this includes a lot of different languages that are relevant to our various refugee communities. And the same is for 311 agents. So if somebody does call 311 and is unable to use English, we can provide a number of options for them as well. And we're also working on our website, which is now available in a couple of different languages. And we do even have a Spanish Twitter account, so you can follow us at Alcalde Keller on Twitter. Now, I want to thank you all for your continued work to keep our city safe during the pandemic. And we see more and more that things are opening up, and also more and more there's a need to continue to stay safe. We're very excited that part of our opening up includes opening the Albuquerque Museum and the Balloon Museum. They are now open today with COVID-safe practices in place, and just like the biopark, visitors are required to wear masks and social distance and purchase tickets online so we can do contact tracing if necessary. Now, our staff has been working through the pandemic to provide city services to folks who need it most, and also try and keep everyone safe and minimize outbreaks in our museums. And everything that we're doing at the city is no different, meaning that we have what we believe is a very strong Corona protocol in place for everything we're doing at the city. That includes the 346,000 senior meals we have served. It also includes the 7,000 senior welfare checks we've done throughout our community, and our 240,000 essential childcare hours that we've done to take care of our kids during this time, and also the 5,000 face coverings that we've provided, and the 50-plus Wi-Fi on Wheels locations throughout our city, which you can find the locations of on our city website. Now, we're also trying to do what we can to help our economy, and that has included $1 million in business relief grants and also over $100 million in infrastructure projects that we've accelerated. So depending on where you live, you'll see lots of construction. First it was Rio Grande, then it was Manal, then it was 4th Street, Now we're building new community centers up in the Singing Arrow neighborhood and out in Westgate. And of course, a wonderful new library in the middle of the International District. And we also finished the new basketball court at Domingo Baca Community Center. So lots more on the way for that. We also have recently presented our budget to City Council, and I know I get a lot of questions about, how are we doing financially as a city, and will we have to, make any drastic changes? And I'm pleased to say that our finance team has done an outstanding job of balancing our budget. We submitted a balanced budget, and it does include a kind of contingency rainy day fund for if the economy continues to suffer. So we feel like at least for the next year, we're in a good position. We won't have to do layoffs or furloughs, but we also cut about $40 million out of the budget. So we are in a hiring freeze. We've cut travel, and we've cut costs in a lot of other different ways in terms of deferring different new projects we were going to start to future years down the road. So we are certainly tightening our belt, but so far we believe we're really going to be able to weather the storm. Now, I know that there's a lot of initial uncertainties around this pandemic, and there are things that we're continuing to figure out as we go. We've learned a lot. We know what is really important, which is keeping our distance, wearing a mask, trying to do as much as we can outside. But we also know that continuing questions remain, and we know that we're probably going to be in this for the long haul. We expect to deal with this, let's say, for at least a year, and we'll see where we are then. But we're going to continue to be flexible and continue to be safe, and also try and keep as much of our safety net in place, whether it's daycare, childcare, city services, and even to the extent we can, our businesses open. So I think with that, we'll cut it short a little bit and start going to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And thank you to everyone who is participating with us for today's telephone town hall. Again, today's event is also bilingual and being interpreted in real time into Spanish. If you would like to listen in Spanish, press *0 on your phone. Again, to listen in Spanish, press *0 on your phone. It will take about 20 seconds to transfer, so please stay on the line. Por favor, presione la estrella y 0 transferido al ayuntamiento en español. Spanish speakers are also encouraged to follow @Alcalde Keller on Twitter, see our COVID resources in Spanish on cabq.gov, or call 311 and ask for a Spanish speaker for any questions about city services. And if you're just joining us in any language, you can press *3 to ask Mayor Keller and our city officials a question. Again, press *3 now and you'll be connected with our staff to ask Mayor Keller a question. Mayor, to start off, we're seeing a number of questions around the same topic. And they're wondering, what do you think this fall and winter will look like for the coronavirus in Albuquerque?
Well, that is certainly the question on the top of everyone's mind. And what I'd like to do is really just say that, look, we know flu season's coming. And so we know that things are probably going to get a little bit worse. It's just the nature of how viruses work. And also, of course, it's correlated to our indoor behavior and to weather changes. And so we are preparing for that. And we're taking a lot of necessary precautions to try and keep people safe and prevent our healthcare system from being overwhelmed. And actually, Mark DeMena, who is our Deputy Director for Environmental Health, he's probably the best person to speak a little bit more to this. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Mark DeMena.
Thank you, Mayor. I think you hit on the biggest point that we keep reinforcing with flu season coming. We do have concerns about flu cases overwhelming our healthcare system. We also have concerns about people getting sick with flu and COVID at the same time because they affect the same systems that can make someone particularly sick and probably have a worse prognosis for both. So fortunately for us, COVID is new, but flu is something we've been dealing with for a long time. We know that our flu vaccination is very effective in preventing those kinds of concerns. So if we get good cooperation with people getting their flu vaccine this year, then we hope to lessen some of the impact. The other interesting facet of this is if people continue to wear masks and continue to do social distancing as we're requiring, those same mitigation efforts, those same protections will help to lessen the transmission of flu. So we're hoping that we might actually be able to get a little bit of a handle on things, give us a chance to deal with the COVID situation we're still dealing with. So if everyone does their part, hopefully it won't be as dark of a fall as we're concerned about.
Thanks so much, Dr. DeMena. And I would just add, too, that our city and Mark and his team, we have been developing and drilling on our vaccine distribution processes. And so we're going to trial run what we would do with a corona vaccine with a flu shot. And so you're going to see really the end of this month and in October, locations all over the city where you can get a flu shot. And we know, this happens every year, and, some of us go to our doctor, or we go to Walgreens and so forth, but this year is going to be really important. And so we're going to really try and ask everyone, it is voluntary, ask everyone to get that flu shot. And for us, we're going to be piloting various locations around the city, senior centers and so forth, where people can get them. And again, even if by chance you can't schedule an appointment, we're going to try and have everything scheduled much like we do other types of testing. We're also going to have options available for free shots. Again, if you have insurance and if you can pay, we want everyone to do that, especially if you have insurance. But we are going to make sure there are some options available for people who aren't able to afford it.
Great. Thank you very much, Mayor. Again, if you're just joining us, you can press *3 on your phone to ask Mayor Keller a question, *3 to be connected with our staff. We're going to go to our first live question, and our first question comes from Joseph. And Joseph has a question about local businesses. Joseph, go right ahead. You're live on the line.
Hello. Thank you, Mayor Kelly, for taking my call, and thank you, city officials, for all being here. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job with how our city and state are, handling this COVID crisis. My question is when do you guys project that businesses, because I know that they're struggling at this point, may possibly open back up to 100% or 75% or something more than 50%? Because I have friends that own small businesses and they're hurting really bad right now. And that's just my question. I don't know if you guys have an answer for that.
All right. Thank you, Joseph. It's a very important question, and I know one, obviously for our restaurants especially. So basically, I'll share with you kind of at a high level, and then if Dr. DeMena wants to add, the state is really doing this based on data, and they've established various, they call them gating criteria based on things like spread rate and number of positive tests and so forth. And so they're really the ones, sort of defining when we can do that. And so, the virus is basically going to define when those criteria are met or not. But we are moving in a very, very positive direction. Albuquerque and New Mexico have been much stronger than the rest of the country and many cities around us. And so I think that does bode well. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm optimistic. But that does correspond with the winter. So I think everyone is being very cautious because of what we just mentioned with respect to flu season. So I have no definitive answer for you, but I would say that, there's a lot of hope for spring because I think we could do things a lot sooner, but everyone is just really worried about, again, the winter dynamics. So that's kind of, as good as I can say is that we're hopeful for spring. But Dr. DeMena, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I think I would agree completely. All of the data that we've been looking at all year long shows us to be on a very good trend. New Mexico has done a good job of bouncing back even from the surge that we saw in the second half of summer. The part of it now that we're tracking, there are a lot of moving parts that are all very focused on this period in time. Kids going back to school in some places, not necessarily APS, but others. the flu season starting, and even the influence of Labor Day weekend, where people, probably did a little more getting together than we'd like to see. All of those things are going to start to come together in the next few weeks and show us, did we survive all of those things without a major bump in cases, or are we going to see a big uptick again? If we maintain the downward trend that we're on, then I think you'll start to see a little bit more leniency, a little more hope for things reopening. And I think the November 1st deadline that you might have heard about for a COVID vaccine might be overly optimistic, but I do think that we can expect to see something by the end of the year, maybe the very beginning of next year. And if that happens, then definitely you start to see the doors open wide. So keep your fingers crossed. We look like we may be coming close to turning a corner here, and we're all very optimistic with what we're seeing.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Demena. And again, you can press *3 on your phone to ask a question, *3 to be connected with our staff to ask Mayor Keller a question. Next, we're going to go to Cassandra. And Cassandra has a question about Halloween. Cassandra, go right ahead. You're live on the line. Cassandra, are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm here. My question is, with all this going on, are the kids going to be allowed to trick or treat this year?
Well, thanks, Cassandra. And I know my 7-year-old is very worried about this. And so I think a lot like the different events that have been planned and even different openings that have been planned, I think we're going to have to wait and see probably till about 10 days before or 14 days before. And I think there's kind of 3 flavors of candy that might happen. One is sort of trick-or-treating with precautions, masks and, trying to stay in your family pod and that kind of stuff. Another one is some sort of way where we're trying to have different versions of trick-or-treating that's either just scaled way down, try and go to your neighbors, which you would normally visit anyway as you're out in the yard or whatever. Or we might, try and put together some different things we could do, possibly outdoors at different larger venues and so forth. Or we're just going to strongly recommend no trick-or-treating. So, but again, I think the important thing is that we've got some time to really assess this and make recommendations. And so it's a good question, and I think it's one that we're going to have to answer come mid-October, but we've got a little bit of time. So in the meantime, I would see, we have our Director of Parks and Rec on, Dave Simon, who also does a lot of our youth programming. Any perspective from your end, Dave?
Yes. Good morning, Albuquerque, and thank you, Mayor Keller. I think that, as the mayor has indicated, if we're under alternatives 1 or 2 of candy flavors in which trick-or-treating is sort of permitted under the proper safety precautions, I want to remind Burqueños that last year Parks and Rec started a wonderful event called Trunk or Treat, which took place at the Balloon Fiesta Park. And this is a way we can do trick-or-treating and with COVID-safe practices. And if it's allowed this year, we will adapt the Trunk or Treat program to make it available to as many people as possible. So I would just echo the mayor's suggestions to stay tuned. And if trick-or-treating is allowable, then look for the Trunk or Treat event at Balloon Fiesta Park.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Simon and Mayor. Again, a reminder, you can press *3 on your phone to be connected with our staff to ask Mayor Keller a question, *3 to ask a question. Next, we're going to go to Betty. And Betty has a question about homelessness. Betty, go right ahead.
Yes, I sure appreciate living in Albuquerque, where so much has been done to help my fellow man on every street corner and woman. But this past week, I came in contact with a little child, 5 years old, riding on the back of his mother's little suitcase. And he came up to me before I could get out of the car, hardly. and I was going to give him a mask and stuff, and he said, "I'm thirsty, give me some water." And that just broke my heart because I didn't have a bottle of water to give him. But I gave the mother some money, and I wanted to take them somewhere. I support Noonday for years, my family has, and we know about Joy Junction. But because my husband and I are older and we're afraid of germs because of what it would mean to our health, I didn't put them in my car and take them somewhere, not that they would have trusted me to do so. But I want to know, is there a number or a way that I can, if I see that again, or somebody with children, that we can get them off the streets? I think they had been kicked out, and my heart breaks, and I know Albuquerque's got a heart, and I appreciate that so much, but I felt bad because I didn't know what else to do and how to get him into a place and off the streets, you know.
Thank you, Betty, for that perspective, and thank you, too, for just helping that child. And this is a tough one in a sense that we've got, we know we've had a homeless challenge around homelessness for several years, and we actually knew it was getting worse over the last few years, and then Corona hit. So this is a problem that we very much are aware of, and we're prioritizing in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to let the expert on this really talk about some of the specifics, but the short answer to your question is there is a number to call, 768-HELP, and this is our homeless hotline. And so that's certain. Usually, too, some of the folks, like the mom in this case, even our homeless tend to often have a cell phone available now. And so that's the right number to call, or you can certainly call it and just ask questions for them. So, but on the broader issue, too, and like what to do, it's great that you mentioned, Noonday and some of the other great organizations that we have. We have a lot of organizations doing work, and there remains to be a big disconnect between a lot of the services out there and the service providers and the individuals. And so it's why we're really pushing this concept called the Gateway Center. But let me hand it over to the Director of Family and Community Services, which includes housing and homelessness, Carol Pierce. Carol, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Keller. I appreciate your question, Betty, and your empathy and compassion for people without homes in our community. The number that Mayor mentioned is a great starting point, the 768-HELP. Also, I want to add that our current city's homeless shelter, which is 20 miles outside of town, is open 24/7 during these COVID times because we want to keep people safe. We do have a special pod, is the language we use, for families and children. In fact, for children of school age, we're working very hard for them to have that Wi-Fi connectivity to access the educational resources they need to. As we have many partners in our community, it sounds like you're very familiar with them, the Rock at Noonday and others that are also following COVID-safe practices that we can get people connected to them, to get food, to get protective face coverings. But 768-HELP for somebody that wasn't near those facilities is a good start. And I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Director Pierce. As a reminder, you can press *3 to ask a question, *3 to be connected with our staff to ask a question for Mayor Keller and our city officials. Next, Mayor, we're going to take a question from our Spanish listeners. And first up, we have a comment from Edgar. And Edgar wants to thank you for supporting families that did not qualify for federal funds, an issue that's been discussed a lot here in the city. And we've got a question from Alma. And Alma wants to know, she's got a question about parents who have children with disabilities who require extra support and how the city is supporting parents and children with disabilities.
Well, thank you so much, Edgar, for your comments, and Alma for your question. The city is doing a couple of things through our community centers right now. In fact, I was just at Duranes Community Center, and they're helping some individuals that meet those categories right now, especially when APS is still sort of trying to figure out their game plan. But let me hand it over to Sasha Pellerin. She runs all our education sort of initiatives, and I think she's probably the best person to speak to this. Sasha, go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Mayor Keller, and thank you, Alma. I think it's really important. So the city has done a host of things. I think one of the biggest is really our work with APS and figuring out how we can continue to support families. So at our 22 community centers across the city, we are set up to serve students whether they have disabilities or they don't, and that's both learning as well as those who are impaired physically. So I think those are already in place, and especially with our safety practices. But I think our work with APS moving forward, we have talked about quite a bit how we're supporting students in education who are suffering with both physical and learning disabilities. And so one amazing thing that APS has done is they have started to bring in some students who are experiencing some of these challenges into the classrooms. So it's a process that's happening very slowly, but I would say that one thing that we can do is we can help bridge that. If families want to go onto the APS website, there are some resources there for families to access. And then in our community centers, again, our staff are working with all students who come to us to ensure that they're getting the services they need in their support for schoolwork, as well as in supporting them in their recreational activities.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. And thank you for all the questions. We're going to try to get to as many questions as we can today, so please press *3 on your phone right now to be connected with our staff to ask a question, *3 to ask a question. Next up, we're going to go to Melvin, and Melvin has a question about recent protests. Melvin, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Albuquerque, for being here. My question is about media reports of APD coddling white militias who show up at Black Lives Matters demonstrations, and APD being relatively aggressive with the demonstrators. I'd like to know if these reports are true, and if so, what's being done.
Thanks so much for that question. And this has been a really important issue for our city all the time, but certainly we've seen this really come to the forefront over the summer. And, you know, I would share a couple of things. I think there's some of this that is, of course, certainly inherent and true, unfortunately. But there's also a lot that's not. And, you know, I think we all understand media, and especially social media, and how things can really get exaggerated or slanted. So anyway, let me speak directly to it, but just want to acknowledge, you know, both of those things at a high level. So, you know, firstly, we did have a situation where, you know, these militias would show up, and it's something that we were not, as a department, and many other cities are in the same situation. You know, this was a dynamic that we just hadn't seen before, where there are, by definition, white supremacist militia members arguing their constitutional freedom of speech and right to bear arms sort of against and antagonizing other protesters and Black Lives Matters, you know, arguing their right to protest as well. And so this was something that was difficult for every city to deal with, and we're no different. So we certainly had our challenges. But we've tried to really learn from each incident. And so one is, we made it clear after the first incident where there seemed to be some unauthorized, completely informal, but totally inappropriate communication beforehand between some officers. We do know that that was the case. Those officers were reprimanded, and we made it clear that should never be the case for any group of any kind. There is no discussion with police and anyone involved in a protest with respect to that kind of thing beforehand. So we made that clear, we made it explicit, and I think to my knowledge, it has not happened since that incident. Then we had another situation where, going into Juneteenth, we wanted to try and have every tool we could to actually not have these militias show up with their weapons at the Juneteenth celebration. And so this is why we used the city's authority to not have firearms in areas where there's kids programming and playgrounds and so forth. And so we implemented a firearms restriction in those areas. And that was really designed so that if these militia folks show up, their guns can be confiscated. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks later, and it did seem to be helpful in that situation, but a couple of weeks later, then we had folks from both kind of ends of the spectrum. We had militia folks show up on Civic Plaza, and then we also had some protesters show up more on the social justice end of the spectrum, also with firearms. And both groups were told that they can't have their firearms and so forth, and some complied and some didn't. And of course, there was one incident where I think there were two African Americans who were cited for disobeying that ordinance. And then there was also one white individual that also happened to. But I will say this, I do think looking at how they were handled, there was some differences in the tone, in all those nuances that matter a lot in terms of how those were enforced. So again, long answer to this is we learned, and now we have a standardized protocol that any kind of enforcement of that nature should be handled the exact same way, and it should have been in the first place. But again, now that is a protocol. We didn't have that before, and we should have, but we do have it now. So let me really just wrap this up by, we've got a long ways to go, but we are doing and have been doing implicit bias training at the police department. We've also been doing anti-racism training, and in fact, we're piloting a much stronger, more in-depth version of that. And overall, we're trying to switch to a different model where we have this new department, the Community Safety Department, if you haven't heard about that, that is not going to be sworn officers responding to calls. So this would be for like behavioral health, mental health issues, even certain family situations, down and outs, and in some ways, different areas around protests and so forth, where we want to have unarmed individuals who are just keeping people safe or helping direct traffic. And so that's this new Community Safety Department that we're building and is now in council's hands to sort of work on the budget for. So I wanted to just honor your question by being very specific about kind of the myths that are out there, but also the realities too. And so hopefully that clarifies things.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And again, *3 to ask a question, *3 to be connected with our staff to ask a question. Next up, we're going to go to Sean, and Sean has a question about libraries. Sean, go right ahead. You are live on the line.
Yes, my name's Shannon, actually. Mayor knows me well. But I'm calling about the $15 million library on Central that you're now committed to building. The problem I see with it is that the design for the library was approved before the pandemic ever happened, and so it's no longer a viable project. If you look at the Southeast Heights, there's no public bathrooms except in libraries, and so people literally are walking from Southeast Heights downtown and back and forth with no public bathrooms available. So what they do is they poop on the street, and there's large, in the Southeast Heights, there's large trash pileups that aren't ever picked up. So those are like little city pandemic hotspots. But for us to build a library at a time when, if you look at the downtown library, it's now a homeless center, because I use the library all the time, but I do it online, and I choose my books and I pick them up. But literally, the downtown library has become a public bathroom, and that's the only place people can go to clean up, and that's what they'll be doing with our $15 million library on Central. So I really
Okay, Sean, thank you for that. And a couple of points there. I think firstly, just to note, we have put porta potties up and down these areas where we're having these challenges. So I understand your point about, permanent public bathrooms, but we actually do now have our first permanent public bathroom down on Central and Rio Grande. And we put porta potties around some of these other hotspot areas for vagrancy, and including up in the International District. And of course, I did see, unfortunately, a video of one blowing across the street the other day. But that aside, we're trying to work on that. We're also having we're having the finishing touches on a mobile showering van and bathroom trailer that actually we're going to use. It's going to be mobile, so it's going to move. But part of it is then folks won't need to use the downtown library. So I think we have some ways to deal with the actual challenge and still have our libraries and build new libraries. And of course, the design came from the community. But let me do this. We do have our Deputy Director of Cultural Services with us, Hakeem Bellamy, and he also oversees the libraries. Hakeem, do you want to add some more perspective on that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I appreciate the question. We all hope that there will be a time post-pandemic when we can gather together again, and we know in that time it'll be just like in past times where libraries are a vital anchor in our communities as far as collective knowledge, as far as community building and storytelling and just being together. And so we hope to get back to a time where it can serve that purpose again. We were really excited about the architect's work with the community and coming up with the design that the community, to your point, Mayor, told us that we needed. A design that will reflect the needs and desires of the community, the visions of the community moving forward. And so we're still super excited about that project, and we were even able to break ground here during the pandemic because this administration has done such a good job moving capital projects forward. So we're thankful. In a larger sense, just because I have the mic for a few seconds, I would say that our libraries have been open, and they've been open for some time now. Once the governor's health order allowed them to open, they've been open as long as the outdoor sections of the biopark have been open. Mayor mentioned earlier that both museums this week, today, the Albuquerque Museum is now open to the public with time ticketing and COVID-safe practices inside. Please wear a mask. And the Balloon Museum will be doing the same tomorrow. The libraries have been open at reduced hours, 35 hours a week, and this week they are opening back up to 40 hours a week, and the community should start seeing weekend hours again soon.
Thank you, Hakeem. Thank you, Mayor. Again, *3 to ask a question. We're trying to get to as many questions as possible. *3 to ask Mayor Keller a question. Next up, we have Anita. And Anita has a question about public projects and public infrastructure. Anita, you can go right ahead. You are live on the line.
Thank you, Mayor Keller, for having this conversation with us today. I heard you mention that government employees are working hard at increasing our infrastructure, and I appreciate that. But with a virus that's only affecting 1.3% of New Mexico's population and only has a potential death rate of less than 0.04%, why is the government employees the only ones with secure jobs? Can you conscientiously handle the inequity and throwing tax dollars at this problem that can be resolved with opening our own city and reducing the amount of fear that people have for a virus that is not affecting that many of us? That we need to come out of the fear factor and get back to business.
Thanks, Anita. And your point about the fear, I just want to echo in a sense that I don't think we should be afraid. And to me, this is about management of a pandemic as opposed to being afraid of it. And I think that also means not being afraid to do things like, go to the grocery store or eat out at a restaurant. Now, I also want to respect each individual's health situation. So obviously, if you have a pre-existing condition, and so forth, then that fear is very real. So I certainly understand that on an individual basis. But as a collective basis, I don't think we should be afraid. I think our state and our city have done a very good job managing through this pandemic. Your point about, the economic realities and the percentages, that you're sharing, I would just add that while I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think the important thing here is that we were trying to basically not lose ground, because I am concerned that as flu season hits and winter hits, we know what happens with flu, we know what happened with SARS and H1N1 and all these other things, and we know that this virus is much, much more transmissible and does have a higher death rate and so forth. So the challenge is we just don't want a repeat of March or April. And so it's worth the conservative approach right now with respect to public health so that we prevent that from happening. Because what I don't want to see is the other end of the spectrum, which you talked about, which is that all of a sudden in November we have to shut down. That would be a disaster for families, for our economy, for jobs. And so what we're doing now is about preventing that. And so I think if we can do that and we get through the winter, we're either going to have the positive weather effects and so forth, or a vaccine, as Dr. Demena mentioned. And then, things are going to be much, much better and get back to some sense of normalcy. But I do think the highest risk period we're looking at is this winter. And the last thing we want to do is have to do a shutdown. And remember, we don't want to overwhelm our hospital system. So we do know this did not happen in Albuquerque, but we know that in dozens and dozens of cities all around our country, if you wanted an elective procedure, you could not get it because of Corona. If you wanted pretty much anything other than the fact that you were dying of Corona, you couldn't get it. And even in some cities like New York City and others, people were not even able to get help if they had Corona. So that's a life and death situation that we want to avoid. And that's why it's worth the sacrifice up front so that we're not in that situation this winter.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Again, *3 to ask a question. We've got about 15 minutes left, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Next up, we're going to go to Cassandra. And Cassandra has a question about mental health. Cassandra, go right ahead.
Hi, yes. Thank you for inviting me to this event. Also giving me the chance to ask this very important question that plagues our community, aside from the coronavirus, and that would be gun violence. So, unfortunately, my family is a victim of gun violence, and would you be willing to share and or support my petition I have, therefore I can present it to lawmakers, which would be under change.org, Evans Law. My child, unfortunately, is a victim of gun violence and was murdered last year by another juvenile. So it's obviously an overall problem in our city and state.
Cassandra, I'm not sure if you're still there, but we did hear most of your comment there. And first, I'm just so sorry for what happened to your child. And thank you for the courage to share that with everyone on this call. Gun violence is, I think, a major problem tearing apart our communities. And what everyone just heard from Cassandra's story, the issue about how no matter what the situation is, whether it is children, whether it is drugs involved, or whether it's a domestic violence situation, the problem is when there is a gun nearby, it becomes deadly and life is lost. And so we also know that the prevalence of this it's pervasive throughout our community. And so this is something that our administration has been at the forefront in New Mexico and in the country on trying to do something about. So I'd love to look at your petition. What I would do is just call 311, and then they'll transfer you over to the mayor's office, and you can send it in, and happy to take a look at it. But we have testified for pretty much in favor of every gun violence reduction program the state's put forth. And we want to mention, I think you might know this, but some of our callers might not. New Mexico is one of the few states where the cities are not allowed to regulate gun violence. And it's in our state constitution. So our state legislature has to really allow us, literally, legally, the ability to do something about this. And so that's just the nature of our state constitution. So I'm very glad that you're trying to advocate at the legislature because we desperately need that. And I would say that the little bit of enforcement that we've been able to do is around trying to enforce felons with firearms. That's not allowed, and so our police department does enforce that, and it's actually something we have been working together with all of our law enforcement partners, even the federal government, on. So that's something that, past departments just didn't really enforce that much, and we've made it a point to absolutely enforce that. That's one thing we can do right now. And the other one was, we did ban guns in community centers and parks, and that was because of these issues that we've been having, just to try and do something. And the last piece that we're trying to work on is we have a program called the Violence Intervention Program, and this basically goes out to young people, and especially some of them are under 18. And when there is a low-level offense that involves a firearm, and we reach out to them, and we basically try and give them an opportunity to change their ways, to go into some different diversion programs, and get out of that cycle of violence. Because the other challenge around gun violence is it usually involves revenge or retribution. And so this team, we just launched this a couple of weeks ago, so it is brand new and it's just starting. But we've seen it in 23 other cities actually produce a reduction in gun violence. And so we're hoping that's going to be the case here. It's going to take about a year to get up and running, but it's something I wish we had 10 years ago. So those are some of the things we're trying to do. And again, happy to take a look at what you're working on, and we'll take it from there. And thank you for sharing your story.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Again, *3 to ask a question. We will try to get to as many questions as possible in the next 10 minutes. You will also have the opportunity to leave Mayor Keller a voicemail at the end of the call. Next, Mayor, we're going to take another question from one of our Spanish listeners. And this question comes from Carmen. And Carmen has a question about opening new businesses. She says there's a long wait line for getting a license to open a new business, and wants to know how the mayor can help in assisting folks being able to open new businesses.
Thank you. Carmen, did you have a question live? Oh, sorry.
No, Mayor. You can go.
Gotcha.
Go right
You
ahead.
translated it. You translated it for me. So thank you for that question. And the answer is we do have a new program explicitly set up to help, and they are bilingual, by the way. You'll want to reach out to our small business office, and that's through the Office of Economic Development. The short answer is just call 311. And this office is actually set up through, we got a couple of different grant programs and so forth, but there's a couple of people who will walk a small business through all of the frankly annoying bureaucratic paperwork that you have to go through. And so that small business office is also in partnership with our minority business office. And so that office can also help you get perhaps city contracts and so forth to help you get up and running, and also keep our business spending local. So there is a place to go, and I would say now is actually a good time to do it, because during Corona, we are waiving a lot of the fees associated with starting a business. And so I think it should be a good time. So reach out to that small business office, and they should be able to concierge you through that process.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And since we are running a little short on time, we do have a few questions here that I think would be great to answer. They revolve around concerns around child abuse during the COVID pandemic, concerns that it may be increasing but possibly underreported, and wanted to see if you could address that.
Sure, this has been a concern both, right now in general on crime. We're seeing all over the country crime, an uptick in crime, but things are a little different because of the pandemic. And so we're very concerned about crimes that happen in the home. And this kind of can cut both ways. In some ways, there's more people at home, and so these kinds of things have been going down. But we're also concerned for especially smaller families or, a family with just one young child and so forth. There's not as many people in the house. We're very concerned about child abuse, child neglect, and we're also concerned about certainly domestic violence. And so the best thing you can do is, if you know of anything or are concerned about a specific situation, call our non-emergency number 242-COPS. But we do have a lieutenant with the Albuquerque Police Department on the phone, Lieutenant Sanders, and he actually specializes in this. So, Lieutenant, what else would you like to add?
Thank you, Mayor, for that. So, to add on to that, I would also remind everybody that CYFD is the central resource for getting involved with families to try to keep families together and bring in a best possible resolution to that. So, as calling the police, you can also call pound SAFE to report any type of child abuse. One other thing that I'd like to highlight is we have just started our Save Jane project, to where we're trying to do public awareness announcements and videos to bring not only awareness but then education into the community to show what signs of child abuse are, and then also to help everybody on how to report it or how to be a supporting avenue for the children of Albuquerque.
Great, thank you very much, Lieutenant Sanders. We are going to take one more question live before we go to the mayor for a closing. So our final question today will come from Nan. And Nan has a question about the upcoming election. Nan, you can go right ahead. You are live on the line.
Thank you very much. My question is about voting. Do you think it will be safe to vote by mail, or should we just go to early voting sites?
Thank you, Nan. This is something, of course, that has been at the forefront of national news, given we have an election and with it we also have a pandemic. So there's a couple of things that I'd like to share with you. First, there's just a good website if folks have questions, nmvote.org. And so anyone's curious, they can get a lot of answers there. But in what I would say is a couple of things. Number one, we're very comfortable in New Mexico with vote by mail. So I don't anticipate any challenges with that or concerns about that. And our Secretary of State has done a number of tweaks to the system, as well as our county clerk, to make that process better and safer and it's certainly accurate and maintain that kind of election integrity that we all expect in our American democracy. So I'm very confident about vote by mail. I also know that we are going to have in-person and early voting locations, and those are, if just in case folks were curious, those are mandated by the Supreme Court. So those are going to be there. And we know also now how to do this with respect to like social distancing and, wiping down the surfaces and so forth. So I will tell you, I am very confident in both methods of voting. And so I really believe that here in New Mexico, I can only speak really to Albuquerque, but a little bit to the state. I would encourage folks just to vote. Pick whichever method you're more comfortable with. I have a high level of confidence in both. And so I do know that in Albuquerque, we had a very positive experience in the primary, which was sort of our initial foray into this. And now our poll workers are better trained and so forth. So I think in New Mexico, we're in a very good place. I am worried about the rest of the country, but I think right here in our town, you can vote either way with both confidence that your vote will count and also safety.
Terrific. Thank you, Mayor. And you can go right ahead and provide some closing remarks here.
Well, thank you so much, everyone who joined us today. And I also want to thank our interpreters for helping us share this information with our Spanish-speaking community. We also want to remind folks of a few things before we hang up today. First, as we talked about, the flu season is coming, and the city is working with our partners to make flu shots available to city employees and the general public in a lot of different locations and formats. So stay tuned for the details on that. And we just encourage everyone, again, it's certainly a choice, but we encourage everyone to get that flu shot. And from a systems perspective, this is our preparation for a COVID vaccine. And so we're able to see how things are going to work and then make improvements as needed as we go, hopefully, sometime soon into the COVID vaccine distribution. I also want to remind everyone, like our last caller did, that November is election season. And we do just really want to encourage everyone to vote. And again, you can pick whichever method you would like to, because we're going to have absentee, early and same-day election voting. But as a reminder, we all know the president is up for election, the office of the president. We also know that there are lots and lots of local races that in this tough time of corona and pandemic and everything else that's happening, they tend to get overlooked, but they're very important. And these are your state house races, your state senate races, very, very important positions. And of course, our judicial, a lot of judges are up as well. So please take the time to research and then to vote. And finally, our census is due at the end of the month. And this has been a challenge, again, because of these issues around the pandemic and so forth. But the census is extremely important. So you can go to my2020census.gov to find out information there. And if you have been contacted by the census, please return those calls or those emails or those text messages, because we say this all the time, but you got to keep saying it. The number of people that are counted in the census is correlated to pretty much every federal dollar that goes through the system that gets distributed to states. So it literally means money for our schools, money for food programs, money for unemployment. All of that is correlated to us doing our part and filling out and responding to the census. So if you have any questions on any of this, please give 311 a call or visit cabq.gov for more information. And if you're a Spanish speaker, our website can also be translated. You'll see the button up top there for that. And you can also ask for a Spanish speaker when you call 311. So thank you so much to everyone. Stay safe, Albuquerque, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to all of our City of Albuquerque officials who have joined us today to provide key information for everyone. And thank you again to everyone for participating in today's bilingual telephone town hall. Please visit cabq.gov for the latest information or call 311. If you'd like to leave a message for the mayor or we didn't get to your question, please remain on the line and you can leave a voicemail in just a moment. This concludes the telephone town hall. Thank you.